Well, I'm starting with the trading room, even though before the trading room I had done some other, an interesting house in Riverside, which is Olmsted's plan, Olmsted's plan. Uh, but the trading room was significant in curating, I mean, in my work. It received a lot of attention. This is a color photo of the black one. That's probably Richard Nichols standing in the foreground. I mean, this room had a drop ceiling, and the ceiling covered the entire ceiling. So nobody knew the ceiling was there except for people like myself who would crawl up there and show reporters, and Richard Nickel and a few other people would steal some of the stencils. But we pulled down the ceiling and then tried to clean the room out to see what it looked like, and we recorded it. So we had a documentation of everything. And ironically, Richard Nickel photographed the whole ceiling, and when he put the pictures together, he thought his camera was broken, but we found out the room was 18 inches out of square, and he thought it was the camera. So we built it 18 inches out of square because here's a detail of the ornament in the old building, and then this is the completed building. You saw this picture. But this skylight, which goes all the way around, actually was calibrated to take in the 18 inches. So that dictated how we built the room. And then you probably are all familiar with Market Square. Bob Mears and Bill Donnell had a company called Broadacre, and Market Square was virtually not falling apart, but deteriorating in terms of its cohesiveness. And we were hired to basically restore Market Square, and our first building was the YMCA building. And this is an early photograph of it, which is the way you always start. You look for documentation, and there was also this wonderful cover. But from that, and all the windows had been boarded up and bricked up, I recreated it to look exactly the way it looked, with some exceptions. We put these storefronts below, and if you look, there are little bay windows that bow out. And we then researched the color scheme for Market Square, and it was a kind of forest green and creamy white, and so we were the dictators of the color scheme and try to keep the awnings and everything looking the way it did with the 1910, 1911. And from this was the first building we did. This is the solution with the awnings and the windows and the storefronts that were new. From that, we were then moved on to Market Square itself, and there were lots of changes made and terrible signage and everything, and we tried to make a cohesive plan of it. And of course, I don't know if you could see this photo well, but there's a little shoeshine boy standing there, and these bay windows were gone. And from this picture, we recreated the bay windows and put them back. We did, there's the color scheme. We opened up a passage so you can go from here to the alley, and then we made the alley into storefronts. So that was all created by my firm and me with the sanctioning of Bob Mears and Bill Donnell at the time. And then there was Nixon Glore in town, and he owned the Deer Path Theater, and the poor guy tried to keep it going, and one or two people would show up a night, and he kept it going for 3 or 5 years like that, and finally he hired me to gut the theater, which is not something I enjoyed doing, but I did my best. This was the back side of the theater, but we put in doors and windows, but kept all the brickwork. Inside, we made this little arcade, which I went and visited tonight, and it still looks good. They've made some cuckoo changes, but other than, I mean, this walkway used to go all the way through, and now it's blocked. But anyway, it still looked pretty good to me, and the glass walks are still there. This is all reconstructed by me. And then here are some small house projects I had. This is a favorite of mine. This is in Michigan, Birmingham, Michigan, but a client bought probably one of the oldest houses on the Rouge River, which is a stream at this point. And it had numerous additions onto it. And I made a rectangle or plan, and I carved out all of the additions to expose this one corner. This is a before picture of the back, and the front was worse. But I carved all this out. If you can see, there were roofs, dormers, and everything, and came up with the original. This is the original facade I uncovered in the house, the one with the 4 windows. And then I cut back, brought the porch, and then transferred roofs and so on. And originally we painted it white, but it was always peeling, so the owners had stripped the white and brought it back to the wood. But it's a very charming house, and unfortunately they're both gone. But I take it they've sold it to somebody worthy. Another project was the Louis Manilow house, Susan and Louis Manilow. It was actually designed by a New York designer called Max Gordon, and he asked me to work with him on it. And he came up with a plan, and I came up with materials and made some changes. And he sadly died on us, but I finished the house. And it became legendary in the art world because it had one of the great 20th century art collections. The house, Louis recently died, and they moved out because Louis had Alzheimer's. But there is a new owner. It's the Hopalmazians and Kohler, Mrs. Kohler, and they bought the house, and they had children. So I poked more windows in and expanded the house. But it's lost some of its cohesiveness, but it's become a very, very strong, usable piece of architecture. Those are early pictures. Another house, I noticed Bob mentioned the module. I'm a big believer in the module, and if you know what that is, you make a grid, and this was a 4-foot grid, I believe, and you place a grid on the drawing, and then you try to fit within the grid. Well, I made a house which is really a pinwheel. If you look at it, each of these 4 wings are offset by one bay, and they all function rather nicely. One's a bedroom wing, master bedroom, guest bedrooms, and then there's the kitchen wing and the living room wing, and then a little tail with a garage. And then when you see here's the exterior. It's in Metamora, Michigan. But the center of the house is a tower, which is where you have a void from setting off the rectangles. And here you can see how well the grid works. The grid is in the ceiling, follows down to the windows, and it's very modular. And we found somebody to make these windows in their garage, and there were, I don't know, maybe 75 of them. But because it was a module, they were all exactly the same size. And he made them in the garage, and from this he went on to making more and more windows, and finally he was bought out by Pella. And he's a very wealthy man right now. But anyway, this is the interior. Here's the house at night. This is the Arts Club plan, I believe, yes. And what happens here, I didn't know it was going to be in black on white, but what happened, the original staircase was on the street, and it was impossible to put the staircase on the street again, because if you were handicapped or something and you went in there, there was no way to go up the stairs, or you would have to go into another entrance. So by putting the staircase in the center of the new building, I made it so that there's an elevator to the side, so you can just turn around, go up the elevator, or up the stair. This is the ground floor, which is a gallery, and then there's a meeting room, which is now a wonderful bar. There's administration, but but the bigger spaces were to hang pictures. And it was Myron's idea that when you go in the building, you should see art first and not look at people eating and so forth. So then you came up the stairs and you were in this very large space, and there's the parlor, the dining room, and the kitchen. People complain that there's no bathrooms up there, but there was no room. But you simply take the elevator and you're right down at the bathroom, so it's not as far away as you think. This is the Ontario entrance. It's on Ontario and St. Clair. Here's the Mies stair. Their picture was nicer. And then this is Bill Zabarin's photograph. But you see, you come up the stairs and you're in this beautiful big space. The skylight running across is exactly the place where the windows would have been, so that daylight washes the staircase. So it was all very well planned and thought out. I used the same color scheme and furniture as where possible, but I added Mies van der Rohe furniture, which Mies never put in the club. So those are Tugendhat chairs and Barcelona furniture. Here you can see the Tugendhat chairs. This is the parlor. Parlor looked somewhat like this in the original club. The platform's a little higher. The curtain colors are similar. Candelabras are similar. And there's the part of the great collection. You're looking at a Brock in this photograph. This is the house that Bill spoke about. I never thought of it copying a Mies house, but yes, it does remind you of the two houses Mies did in Berlin, but it was totally unconscious. But it's a nice open house. It's on a historic street in Kenwood Hyde Park, and the Landmark Commission complained that it was too modern, and I said, oh no, it's very Victorian. It has a staircase right in the front of the house, and you go up steps just like all the other houses on the street. And the guy pleaded with me. He said, can't you at least slope the roof? And I just said, no, we won. By the way, Michelle Obama was on that committee, but I didn't know she was going to be First Lady. And here's the interior of that house. It was a very reasonable house. I mean, we really had to pinch pennies and use everything, commercial windows, inexpensive oak floors, limestone. But it's got nice proportions and nice high ceilings, something I like. This is a picture of the top of Olympia Towers, and the owner is Sam Zell, and his wife, whose name is somehow skipping, Helen. And anyway, it's a two-story penthouse, and Sam built the building. And at one time he had one part, and then and then a second part, and the third part. Now he owns 3/4 of the floor. But I did the first part, and it was very complicated because it was a very inflexible structure and a lot of structure. But we worked around it and managed to penetrate, to connect these rooms together, and made a very beautiful room. This is the dining room, and you see there are two-story ceilings in some parts and bedrooms. And then this is an odd job. This is called the National Italian American Sports Hall of Fame on Taylor Street. And it was kind of a one-man band. The man who ran it collected all of these artifacts, and he had a lot of fans, and they supported him and got him money. The mayor gave them the land. And they wanted a building that looked like a banquet hall on, in Northfield or something like that, and with a spiral staircase. And I said, well, I think you need more than that. So I ended up giving them a 3-story building, and my spiral staircase was not quite what they expected, but it's quite beautiful, and it works. And then I convinced them to sell the limestone squares on the wall to make money, but And they did it, and even Frank Sinatra family bought one, but they never could make it. It still exists, but I think they rent the space now. It's much more modest. I had a nice little theater in the basement they never completed. But someday it has a beautiful terrace. A lot of people rent out the ballroom for weddings, which is one of their goals. This is the little Frank Lloyd Wright house right near here in Glencoe. This was called the Glassner House. It was a modest house built on the ravine right at Sheridan Road. You've probably driven by it hundreds of times, and it was really a modest house made practically sitting on stilts on this hillside on the ravine, and it was in terrible shape. And a man in Chicago read about it, and a girlfriend called him and said, "I think you should buy this house," and he bought it. And then he proceeded to have me restore it to the tune of maybe $3 million, and it sits there empty because he doesn't particularly want to live here, and he doesn't want to sell it, or he wants to sell it, but he doesn't know how. But we put in several rooms in the lower level, and it works really well, and the upstairs is nicely restored. This is looking from the ravine. It's in beautiful shape now, and it had these tie rods to hold the roof, and it was painted white and black inside. It was owned by the Feinbergs. I don't know if you remember Feinberg. He was a psychiatrist, and Jonathan Feinberg is his son. He's a historian. Anyway, we removed the tie rods and restored it to its original colors, and but it sits here empty. Here's the kitchen. I love this little kitchen. So I heard somebody mention a linoleum floor. This is 1906, and the floor was made out of squares of linoleum 6 inches by 6 inches, and we had that fabricated and made. And it works very well. Another aspect of my work are exhibition design, and here's a series I've done for the Neue Gallery in New York. This was an exhibition on Vienna 1900, and one room was dedicated to the architect Otto Wagner. This is his furniture and chairs and frieze and some of his drawings. And then the upper floors, one side was devoted to the work of Joseph Hoffman, who was a very good friend of Klimt's, and most of his clients were in the art world, and Joseph Hoffman was the preferred architect, and here is a detail of that room, and that's in fact a Klimt painting there. On the other side of the room was his competitor, Adolf Loos, and this is the Adolf Loos interior. That's an embossed wallpaper, very disciplined, much more conservative, but still Loos is equally as important an architect, and he was one of the people who entered the Tribune Tower competition, and he had done a black ionic column, 30 stories tall, and if you ever drive down LaSalle Street, you see it's painted in the facade of a building as a kind of an idea of what it might have looked like. And then this is a recent exhibition I did. I've done 7 exhibitions here. This was based on the Wiener Werkstatt, which was an organization in Vienna that was formed by a group of artisans to raise the level of design objects like teapots, candlesticks, waste paper baskets, chairs, buildings. And they created this organization in about 1906, 1907. They showed furniture from other architects like Macintosh and so on. But this exhibition was the first exhibition of a complete survey of the work. And we divided it into basically 3 rooms. This was the early room with the early work. And again, you're looking at Joseph Hoffman, Coleman Mosier, Dagobah Peke, architects you probably never heard of, but were very instrumental in bringing culture and art to Vienna, and it spread even to Chicago, where there were a lot of Viennese who moved here. This was the middle room, and we're now in the first room was 1906. This room is about 1912, where the work was becoming more classical, so we installed it in a way which was much more formal. For example, and I look at pictures at all my work and study things to get it correct, but these walls are corrugated, and so it's like a fluted column, and the cabinet is very beautifully proportioned, and these four horsemen on top are porcelain horsemen that were made by one of the Viennese secessionist architects. And the clock in the foreground is owned by the Art Institute of Chicago, and it was loaned for this exhibition. And then the third room, which is about 1926, was designed for the Paris exhibition in 1926, 1927. And here it becomes a little more flamboyant, but evidently this had a big influence on the Art Deco movement. And if you look closely, you'll see chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, furniture behind the vitrines, fabrics, wallpapers, lamps, many decorative objects for women, like handbags, little cases, cigarette cases, and anyway, and this movement lasted until the 30s, and then eventually collapsed. In fact, there was one architect named Joseph Urban who was sort of forgotten, but Joseph Urban came to, he practiced he had a shop in New York where he was doing work, and he did the new school there, which is extraordinarily beautiful, and is probably the influence for Radio City Music Hall. And not to mention, in Chicago, he did windows for Marshall Field. He did the Urban Room at Congress Hotel. None of this has been documented. And also, he did the color scheme for the World's Fair of 1933 in Chicago. And he never got to see it. He died and was forgotten. In New York, he also did the Hearst Building, which still exists, except there's a tower now coming out of the top of it, very handsome tower by Foster. And then last exhibition I want to show is a favorite of mine and John Bryan's. This is the Irish show at the Art Institute. We were confronted with the problem that the Art Institute wasn't too excited about having the show. The curator had worked very hard on it. They kept cutting his budget down, or the budget was way over. And so John asked me to, help with the design of it, and I came up with this scheme where I tried to recreate kind of an Irish country house atmosphere. It was an extraordinarily beautiful exhibition. We have these horns that we found here in Chicago. They were at the College of Surgeons, and they gave them to us, but this was typical of an Irish hallway. We have some of the earliest, most important paintings, early harps in this show, Irish silver, Irish linen, paintings of Irish people. Here's the Irish linen room. Silver room. And then another favorite room of mine was this room, which was Irish furniture, which had distinct characteristics. For example, the cabriole legs, the carving, other signs of what is good Irish furniture. And then you're going from this rose room, you went into this sort of mint green room, which had travel objects of souvenirs and travel pictures and so forth. But it was a wonderful exhibition. We were all very proud of it, and it did very well at the Art Institute in spite of it. And we had to raise our own money for much of it to get it done. And And well, there's one story I'll tell if you're not bored, but I love this story. John Bryan found a man named John O'Brien, and John O'Brien was what we would call him an Irishophile, and he had a great collection and not so great collection of Irish furniture, and John found him, and he bought a famous house here in Hubbard's Woods. It was the oldest house on the lake, and it had seen the when the disaster took place of the what's the boat that sank? The Elgin sank. The people swam to the shore, and this house had just tremendous history. Well, John O'Brien decides he's going to buy the house from our friend. Okay, what is our friend? Yeah, Ned Janata, and Ned, who I knew from an earlier incident, but anyway, Ned wanted to save the facade, the house, really, and he was so disappointed it was going to be torn down. So I was called in, and we call ourselves the preservation police here, but I looked at the house and everything, and then I talked to the architect, and we came to we had to go to court to stop him from changing it. And he kept trying to say he's going to save the facade, but then he would make it symmetrical. The beauty of it was asymmetrical. So it was really unique, and it was made out of old Milwaukee brick and so forth. And anyway, we went through to a trial at the Preservation Board in Glencoe, Winnetka. And much to my shock, the vote was 5-1 in favor of saving the facade. And I had made a compromise for John. I said, okay, I understand the problem. Then just move it back. I know you want a driveway, you want a turn thing and so forth. So he listened to me, and he moved the house at great expense. Saved the facade. I haven't seen it yet, but it's supposedly correctly. He kept the windows in the right place, and he was disappointed that when you opened the door you didn't see the lake. I said, well, you turn 90 degrees and you see the lake. But anyway, I convinced him, and in the meanwhile, we were working on the Irish show. Here I'm fighting him and working on the Irish show, and he's making donations, and I got him to donate the floors, the wood floor. But anyway, we all remained friends, and we solved the problem. Anyway, lastly is Crabtree Farm. Now, if you all know Crabtree Farm, there are a series of dairy buildings, and this is one of the typical buildings. And this was the inspiration for this, what we call the summer house. And my first job here was to design a trellis for the house, and I found an old photograph, and I did a pretty good job of doing that. And then John gave me other jobs. This was the gutting of one of the buildings, and we turned it into a lodge where we exposed these trusses, which were hidden behind like a plaster. You didn't even know they were there, but we maintained the trusses, put in a little balcony, and made this first job, which was the lodge. And then I was asked to do a bridge to gap a little stream. It's a 32-foot bridge, and I made a Virindle truss, which is more like a sculpture in the landscape, but it's Corten steel, and it's a nice little walk. It looks like a railroad would go over it, but it's much smaller than it appears. And then the summer house and the pool, which followed the summer house right on its heels. And again, the tower was a way to give the house some relationship to the other buildings which had a tower, but not to compete. And also, if you go up there, if you got the stamina to walk up the stairs, you will see the lake. This is the living room of the house, and up in those matching staircase are master bedrooms, and there's a bunkhouse with 4 more bedrooms. They're very small, but they're for all the grandchildren. This is the staircase to the tower, and then here's the pool, And then here's the house at night. Oh, here's one more project. Oh yes, this is a townhouse in near DePaul, and the problem here was this not such a beautiful house, but there were 4 levels because they opted to go into the ground floor, and the levels were all different heights, and the top level was put on top of the roof, so from the 3rd floor to the 4th floor was maybe 16 feet, so that's a lot of stairs. So I devised this oval staircase, and lo and behold, it got built, but we had to get the staircase to work so you had landings going to each level, and it was done. And there was one innovative thing we did, and it wasn't my idea, but the man who made it said I could make the rail as part of the whole staircase. So the rail is laser cut and attached as one piece to the stringer, and it's enormously strong, and it's quite fun to walk up, and it's a long way up. And then of course, not all jobs are big. This is my small job for Pam and Roger Hall. They called me in. This is what on Spruce Street in Lake Forest, and Pam had designed this house, or with somebody, I hope, in like the 1960s, and she had an idea that there would be these dormers. Well, they turned out to be fake, and there were a lot of roof and a lot of turns, and they wanted an elevator in the building, and they took me around the whole house and said, we could put one in the kitchen, we could put one here, and I said, Pam, that's not a good place for an elevator. You don't want to have to wheel yourself or walk through other rooms to get to the main part of the house. So I devised a way of raising the entrance so we can put an elevator in this little closet here. I mean, it was big enough for a real elevator, not, they thought of these kind where you stand up or so forth. And so I worked with the contractor, and sure enough, we squeezed an elevator in here, and we raised the top of the house, which covered all of those funny little dormers, that fake dormers, and so I think we ended up with a better looking house. I mean, it became more of a Georgian house. Anyway, I wanted to end with that. Thank you. Sure, I'd love to take questions.
Do you have any questions?
John?
Yes.
John Schultz, great talk.
Hey, Franz, I didn't even know you were here. If I had known that, I would have made it more about me. No. Yeah, thank you, Franz. Nice to see you.
Any other
You're wrong
questions?
over there.
Any other questions or any questions? No?
Hey, here's one.
I had a question. You just recently completed the governor's mansion, correct?
Well, it's not completed yet, but we are all working on it, including Mr. Bryan and myself. We're in charge of the art installation. My office is doing the architecture. Yes?
What's the question?
Oh, the question is that our office is working on the Illinois governor's mansion in Springfield, which is somewhat controversial because, there are people who have withdrawn their art because they don't like our Republican governor, and we didn't think we were going to be political pawns, but anyway, to his credit and his wife's credit, they inherited a house which was so dilapidated that you had to walk up 2 huge flights of stairs to go to the apartment, which looked like something out of The Shining. Did you see the movie The Shining? Long corridor with doors, and a kitchen which had a microwave, 2 feet of counter, a sink, and a dumbwaiter, and probably a refrigerator. I mean, it was that small. And his wife and he had the idea that they would restore the governor's mansion, and they did a little, survey for architects, and we received the job. We had done the state capitol. We did 2 phases of the state capitol, but that was my partner's work, so I don't talk so much about it. But and he's doing the governor's mansion, but I'm working on the art part, the installation. And we have a collector, I mean a curator, and it's going to be all art from Illinois, Illinois artists. I think it's going to be quite wonderful. Yes?
I'm wondering if there are other architects in the area who do what you do as far as historic preservation, or are you unique in that?
No, no, no. The question is, am I the only architect who does historic preservation? No, I never intended to do it. It just happened because there was nobody else doing it. But now we have Gunny Harbo, who's very, very good. Bill Hasbrook died recently, but he was older than I, but he started after me. And there are others, Ann Sullivan, who teaches preservation. So there are people who go to school and are taught preservation. I was never taught preservation. I did it instinctively. And I took buildings apart so I knew how to put them back together in a way. But also, they don't do what I do. They don't do art exhibitions. They don't do modern architecture. I mean, I seem to, because of my training at IIT, I feel more comfortable doing those things. Well, that's Alfred Caldwell, who Robert mentioned, was my mentor. He was an extraordinary man, and he was self-taught for the most part, and studied with Jens Jensen. He built his own farm in Wisconsin, right over the border in Bristol. And the farm is not abandoned, but the heirs aren't that interested in it. There's one young man who owns an orchard next door. He's not so young anymore, he's in his 60s, but since he was a child, I mean a young man, he helped Alfred Caldwell with the farm, and he's very attached, and he's looking after it until we can find something that could happen to the farm. They're beautiful buildings, beautiful site. He built it in an abandoned farm, which was all rocky, and now it's very green and beautiful.
We like to take them up to the second floor and talk about the chipped glass on the interior.
Yes,
Did you have to duplicate that, or
we duplicated that.
You really did.
Yes.
Fabulous.
Well, I mean, the secret there is I had, Bill Donnell, who started Market Square at Broadacre, he ended up with that building. I think Mears and Donnell split. And Bill Donnell took the Monadnock building, and he devoted his life to restoring it, and he even got an architectural degree in the process. And we've remained friends, except both of us are getting deaf. And the other day we were at the Arts Club. They have a new bar, and I took he and his wife to the bar. And can you imagine 2 deaf people talking to each other in a bar? But anyway, it was he's an extraordinary man, and he saw to everything, and he did what I told him, and he's learned from it, and we're just thrilled with it. I mean, we went to Italy to get the floors made. We discovered the marble. We discovered the aluminum, that it was aluminum, and then the chipped glass was, you know how that's done. I don't know if it's still done that way, but they get sheets of plate glass and they paste this glue made from animals, and then they put the glue on, and then the glue shrinks and pops the top of the glass. And I don't know, I should have asked him what he's doing for new pieces, but he's probably got a stock of it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
What about the elevators? Do you think there's anything at all that we could do about the look of the elevators?
Yeah, we designed that, but can't afford it. The aluminum that you're seeing on there is made to clip on, the grill that was in the hall?
Yeah.
That's an element of that elevator. That grill was on all the elevator doors. So the possibility of casting that and putting it on all the doors would be extraordinary, but I don't know if it'll ever get done.
Oh, but just to know that, at
Yeah.
least I can explain that, because now we just kind of don't look at them as we walk by. 'Cause
Oh,
it's not the way it should
I don't even mind them actually, but, you know, it's,
be. Everything else is so perfect.
yeah, no, it would be beautiful. I mean, the idea of using aluminum on the ground floor and steel on the upper floors is another idea. Aluminum was a new material in 1890, and there were a few buildings that used it. One was the Daughters of Isabella, who were the cohorts of the Knights of Columbus. And most people don't know this, but there was an organization called the Daughters of Isabella, and they hired William LeBaron and Jenny to do a little building, which was one of my student projects. And it was all aluminum inside, and it was one of the first. Aluminum was a new material, and casting it and everything. So this must have been one of the first or second buildings of aluminum. Well, there's, developers are cunning, and our mayor isn't too sympathetic to preservation. I'd say the best buildings have been taken care of. The Landmark Commission won't even answer my, call me back. I mean, I don't know what you do, but, and, the TIF funds, which were going toward Carson Peary Scott, which restored that, and, I mean, have been given to other organizations, which is, so it's not a happy picture. The good news is that the great buildings are more or less in good hands.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
John, we're going to have you, John.
I'd like to thank Robert and Bill for their presentation. Also, we have refreshments in the Nagel room as you go out. And so, please, and also, kind of way of a side note, I guess you will, talking to restoration and see the wonderful work that you've done. Many of you know that we're in the process right now of our Lake Forest train station, the interior restoration, renovation. This can't be a pure restoration. But we have found the original 1900 horizontal oak wainscoting that was hidden behind beadboard someone put up. We're able to salvage about 50% of that, but we have new oak that has been made to the exact replica, and that is already going up. New beadboard coming in, and plus we have quarry tile that is being in process right now, shipped from England, because we can't find it here in the United States anymore. So it's octagonal quarry tile to exactly replicate what was put in the train station in 1900. So we're kind of working our way towards that.
Yeah.
So, but John, thank you so much. I
You're welcome.
appreciate it.